Check, check. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this session, Navigating Top Cyber Risks and Regulatory Requirements. Just a reminder, this session is recorded. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. I could bring the mic over to you, or you can make your way to the mics there. Please help me welcome in our speakers today, Milad and Mani. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. How is day 2 at RSA going on for you? All good? Excited? Fun? Okay, cool. So my name is Mani. I'm America's Field CISO at SentinelOne. Before SentinelOne, I used to work as a security practitioner. I specialize in cybersecurity strategy, incident response, and risk management. I also have Milad with me. Milad, do you want to introduce yourself?
I guess I have no choice. Hey everyone, so my name is Milad. I'm the Global Field CISO at SentinelOne. 20 years in cybersecurity domain. Started as a DFIR consultant, moved over to security architecture, and then later moved into the vendor side.
Cool. Let's get started. All right, the usual disclaimer from RSA, just for your reference. So we have come a long way. We have evolved from using desktops to mobiles at our workplace, where we want to be interconnected, we want to be talking to each other easily, quickly, and fastly. And we want things to be done at a faster pace ever than before. So this hyper-connected world basically has created a lot of challenges. Of course, it has given a lot of benefits to us in terms of saving our time, making our lives easier. But let's look at some of the challenges as well, because challenges specifically in the security side. So let's talk about the complexity of the environment right now. So we have too many devices, surfaces. Example, we have our usual endpoints, we have our mobiles, we have cloud, everything being connected, and then we have the behind the scenes picture, which is the architecture. So we have created this complex architecture and environment where organizations are facing challenges of what is actually in my environment. Am I having the full visibility of what's going on in my environment? How am I putting controls to reduce the risk? As they say, all roads lead to Rome, all roads should lead to risk management. So any kind of technology that is put in the environment, you have to see that the risk is minimized at all levels. Now, as I mentioned about interconnectedness, right? So in our daily lives, we use our mobiles for everything. You want to have an app on your mobile, just install it and use it. And if you want to interact with your colleague, just Slack them or talk to them on Teams, or whichever way that is possible to you. So this interconnectedness has actually created a problem for cybersecurity professionals, because when the infection or when a malware infection happens, it doesn't stick to one device. It keeps on spreading to other devices also. So it has created a challenge of like isolating the device and actually mitigating it. So in overall, it has become harder than ever just to isolate one particular device and mitigate it. Now, just talk about data. Data is the oil, you might have already heard. So everything in the organization revolves around the data, how data is the center of the universe. Now, organizations have started creating a lot of data, and they have issues with the storage of the data. They have issues with like, where should I actually host them in the cloud provider, right? Which geographic region? So when you have so much of data to manage, how are you actually securing it? Now, let's look at the other side of the stories as well. So we have Internet of Things. So we have Internet of Things like in organizations to make it life easier, right? Like a smart speaker in the corporate room. And in general, IoT or Internet of Things have challenges because they usually don't have the typical cybersecurity and privacy capabilities that you traditionally see in IT devices. So sometimes, as NIST, NIST says that they're also called as black boxes because they have like limited power and storage facilities. So you can't really apply the usual controls that you apply for IT devices to the IoT devices. The other side, we also have supply chain attacks. I think that's the most discussed topic in the last 3 years, where we have seen the highest impact to organizations because there is something in the supply chain that has been compromised and that's affecting your organization. So in most of the cases, if you see in the attacks, you would see a trend that the organizations have clearly not evaluated the impact of your suppliers in the whole cybersecurity supply chain. And there was an era where Revil ransomware was creating waves, basically taking advantage of all the loopholes they would have in the supply chain and attacking organizations. I don't want to like quote the major instance, but you have seen like how security industry has been talking about two main incidents that happened in the last 3 years. And cloud security. So as COVID-19 has accelerated this growth of like adopting cloud for organizations, because overnight we were supposed to scale up all our employees because they wanted to work remote because of the health hazard, right? So in that situations, we basically pushed organizations to cloud to scale up and provide the necessary requirements for the employees. And this created a lot of issues for cybersecurity professionals because now you're in a rush state where you have not really evaluated the requirements to move from traditional on-premise environment to a cloud environment. Overall, I know the slide does not talk about all of this, but I just wanted to summarize that these hyper-connected world, as much as it makes our lives easier, it has created a lot of problems for cybersecurity professionals. So moving on to the threat landscape. As I talked about the challenges that we have problems with the hyper-connected world, let me quote some instances specifically related to, let me start with ransomware. So I think according to one research study, the average time to execute an enterprise ransomware attack has been reduced to 3.85 days in the last 3 years. So that makes me question like, okay, so the time has reduced so much, what are the controls that I'm taking than before so that I can address this issue? Now let's take the second step. And there was a research study which conducted, they took 53 GB of files and they wanted to see which ransomware families can encrypt them quickly. So they took like 4 machines, installed them with Windows operating system, and they had that 53 GB of data, and they started the 10 ransomware families which are famously known onto that file of data. And what happened? Any guesses on how much time the data was encrypted? Any guesses? If anybody went through a research like that? You can take a ballpark, yeah? Okay, close. But it took like 5 minutes, 50 seconds to basically encrypt 53 GB of files of data. Now let's see how that impacts organizations, right? So have I had my defense in depth strategy active? Did I really secure my organization from these kind of attacks? In cyber, I think the motto is, the question is not about, will it happen to me or not? The question is, will you be able to defend yourself against when it happens, right? Nobody is guaranteed against cyber attack. Now let's talk about cloud security as well. So when we talk about a threat related to cloud security or cloud native cyber attacks, you have this general attack scenario where you have a threat actor exploiting an open authorization for applications. And it basically lures users to give their actual credentials so that they can store that on the browser or the application. So whenever you visit back, you basically pull that data from the remembered data. So what happens with that? As a threat actor, you can create a malicious application. You can ask users to, you can get this, you can get that. This is great. This application solves your business issues, something like that, and lure you into that application. And when user credentials are taken by the threat actor takes those credentials and enters into your environment as a legitimate user. Now you can't make even a difference between an actual user and a threat actor. We also have threats spread across IoT and supply chain as well, as I mentioned in my previous slide. So on this particular slide, what you're seeing is a red graph and a green graph between an attacker and a defender. So the attacker graph is basically going forward exponentially. The reason is that they're able to make use of the latest technologies and attack the organizations. And for us, for defenders, we work under so many constraints, right? So many conditions. We have different issues with our industry as well, like skill shortage issue or like technology trying to fit in within our environment. So this basically creates a threat efficiency gap where we are trying to defend ourselves from the attackers.
There's an interesting aspect to that, what Manny is talking about. Just think about all the discussion around ChatGPT right now. Test. So there's an interesting discussion right now happening around ChatGPT, and I was just yesterday on another panel where the discussion was about how do we use it from an attack or from a defense perspective, right? And what was fascinating was like, some of the folks were like, oh, we're just going to have a policy to not use it. I'm like, that's not going to help you because the attackers don't have that policy. They are trying to figure out how they can use this new technology for their benefit, right? So if we continuously think about like new technology breakthroughs and we just block it at first sight because we don't understand it or we don't know how to best effectively use it, it will always enable the attacker to have the overhand, right? And that's why we continuously see this efficiency gap increasing between the attacker and the defender. So, look, there are a lot of challenges that we're facing. I think none of them should surprise you. I mean, you are security practitioners, security leaders, right? So you're seeing this day in, day out, right? So you know the challenges about recruitment, right? Finding skilled security professionals, the ramp-up time it takes to bring in new people, right? It's just increasingly challenging for a lot of organizations to, while at the same time trying to deal with the sheer volume of data or alerts that they're facing in the organization, right? But fundamentally, I think there are like these two buckets, right? There's on the business side, the challenge that we're facing, and then on the technical control side, right? We touched on two of the side, on the business side, we talked about the skill shortage a little bit. And an interesting area is compliance, right? I think for too long there was like this almost war between security practitioners and the GRC folks. I think we need to get closer together to work better together. Similarly, like if you think about like what's happening between development and security, right? DevOps, right? Secure DevOps, we need to get closer together. Essentially what it means is, as a company, we need to collaborate more, right? Regardless if we talk about our developers or our GRC folks or on the compliance side and so on. And we need to figure out how do we revamp our security programs. A lot of my discussions with different CISOs in oil and gas and financial services, it's like, oh, we're gonna go and get this product. I'm like, why? Like, why do you need that product? Right? You have the right procedures in place. How do you know that this will be successful for you, right? It's about like jumping the ship and go straight to the technology before understanding the people aspect, the procedure aspect, the strategy, essentially, right? I once asked a security leader, I'm like, can you point me to your like strategy? Like, where is it documented? Like, and he was able to show me, but the problem was it was dated from the era of Windows XP. Right? That's what I said. So, and the problem with that is like when you ask them, okay, but why is that? It's like, oh, I didn't have time, right? Because we have so much thing going on, I just don't get to sitting down, focusing on the strategy. And then similarly on the technical control side, right? I think there's a lot of things that folks are trying to solve just with the tech. I think it's a combination of a variety of aspects. But one key thing that I've been fascinated about, I was talking to a oil and gas industry sister from there, and it was like, oh, we got this, we got that, we got this, we got the AV, we got the ER, we got this, like they listed like all the acronyms that exist. And I'm like, okay, so you're done? I'm like, yeah, we have all of it. I'm like, yeah, but like, you understand that you might think in this checklist, but the attacker doesn't. Right? The attacker is thinking graphs. The attacker is just looking for the weakest link. The attacker is looking for someone that continues to complain about their employer or LinkedIn, and then send a targeted phishing email. And guess what? That phishing email is probably generated by GPT-4, and there might be even some deep fake AI that's just visualizing that as well. So we need to understand how do we move our isolated security controls across the organization, right? It shouldn't be, these are my endpoint controls, these are my identity controls, right? It should be, how do I think about the full life cycle and how the convergence of the controls that I need. And then the other part is essentially on our ability not only to detect and respond, but also on the containment side, particularly understanding how do we obviously reduce the time. I mean, that's always good, right? You want to reduce the time, but how do we do it more effectively, right? How do we make sure our SOC analysts are not continuously burning out? How do we make sure that it is more easier to find context? Context in our world is king. We need to be able to give the context the SOC analyst needs as fast as possible. Do I have the right procedures in order to enable that? Do I have the right tooling in order to enable that? So on the flip side, right, what are we seeing like across the globe from a legislation perspective? I think there are two ways to interpret all of that, right? One is, oh my God, I'm not going to deal with this. It's too complicated. I don't even understand why they're doing this. It's just my data. The other way I tend to think about it is it's a great conversation enabler with the business, right? Because when you start talking about things like GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation from the European Union, when you talk about the Chinese cybersecurity law, the Saudi cybersecurity, the US, like the recent executive orders that have been issued, these are things that business folks, like the CIO, the CEO, the CFO, understand in a way of, it is important. Yeah, we need to make sure we are compliant, right? These are, when you are able to articulate that and pair it with your requirements from a security perspective, that's when I see a lot of success of asking for what you're looking for, right? Because many times you are under-resourced, understaffed, or you don't have the budget you need to operate effectively a security program. These are the things that will help us to make the business case. And if I look at like across many of them, right, like it doesn't matter if you look in the US, what's happening around the world, it's always, most of the time, about the user data, right? Where is the data hosted? And can you prove that you did your best, based on your best ability in order to protect that data, and prove to me essentially how do you effectively detect and respond if you're compromised. And if you are compromised, you have to report it, right? Like for the most of these legislations, doesn't matter in which country, they're along these lines, which basically gives us the opportunity to improve our security program and ask the business for the things that we need in order to make it work.
So the question is, where do we start, right? We have different cybersecurity requirements and regulations coming up. And if your business is global, you have like different locations that need to be adapted to the requirements and implement those requirements. So if you have seen in the previous slide, there are like across different countries, new cybersecurity requirements coming up, talking about the requirements. Let's take a step back and understand, don't we need a mental model shift of understanding that requirements are not a compliance check, rather an enabler for us to have those business discussions with business folks, having those discussions with the business departments, having those discussions with the C-suite, saying that how it could enable the business and in some respects provide competitive advantage as well. And the common themes that you would have noticed, or in general for the cybersecurity requirements, is that the requirements are going to come. Whatever everybody thinks, they're going to come, because that's how the industry and the environment is moving towards. And it's needed also, right? Because we have seen cases where attacks have happened, and we have also seen cases where organizations did not take the necessary steps, even not following the Cyber Hygiene 101. So it is necessary that, and that's the reason why these conversations kind of go on with regards to requirements, having these requirements in place so that they could enable organizations or benchmark the requirements across the industries so that it could enable them to have those discussions. The second thing is the penalties, the fines, if you don't comply with the regulations and the legislative requirements, right? So we have seen cases where organizations have been penalized with a lot of fines, a lot of money has been spent in just paying that fines, right? So as a security leader, as a security practitioner, you would have to think about the broader perspective as well. It is in fact not having cybersecurity is impacting your organization. And if you are able to articulate that kind of discussions with the business leaders, it could give a lot more support to you in terms of carrying out any initiatives that you want. And most importantly, when I think about it, and I was a security practitioner before, so when I think about it and I go back, it is actually needed, right? You need to understand your own organization to understand what are the gaps. And there are occasions where you might feel dejected of not getting enough support from the business leaders. I think these kind of requirements also drive those conversations. Now, this is a kind of like management or the leadership story that we have. So let's talk about how to achieve the requirements across in the organization. So focusing on people, process, technology. And what you're seeing is all these three things are based on something called organizational culture. So what is your organization treating cyber as? Is it a strategic risk? If it is a strategic risk, then you have the leadership support to drive any kind of cybersecurity conversations in your organization. And the second point is talking specifically about process and technology. Let's say, I have come across a situation where the customer was going into the cloud transformation, right? And they had people as well as the technology or the tools. Everybody has an understanding of the current space they were in, the traditional model, and they wanted to move to a cloud. So they have no idea how the cloud transformation is going to impact the rest of the business. They have never understood what is the impact of skill sets that need to be improved or like upgraded for people who work on the systems, right? So there is skills upgrade from a people's perspective. The second part is, do your users know how to use the technology? So are the users aware of the various cyber attacks that come in with the use of cloud technologies? Have you provided the training or not? And in regards to technology, so when you upgrade your systems or move to a different environment, you also need to understand how is it holistically? How are these tools coming together so that they are giving the enough comfort for you in terms of security? So do you have that holistic picture of like how people, process, technology are playing together? And this is based definitely on the organizational culture, which drives the decisions, where you have the support of the leadership and you also have the support of the users. Because as a security professional, my customers are my users. So they need to be comfortable in using the technology, and as well as I have to enable them instead of being a roadblock. So I should not be the person who says no all the time. I should be the person who is presenting options to my users in using the technology or the tools more effectively and as well as more efficiently and more securely. And focusing on the triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, understanding that these are integral part of everything that security does, starting from people, process, technology, how they impact the final end user, how they contribute to the business is quite important. And these kind of discussions are usually not done a lot with security practitioners in my previous positions that I've seen. The reason is that we're already hell-bent with a lot of operations that we have to deal with. I think it's necessary to have these conversations before, because it kind of saves a lot of time and saves you from a lot of bad situations in terms of attacks.
I think ultimately, at one point when we have these kind of discussions, folks are like, okay, but what do we do, right? It's like, I got it, hyper-connected world, everything is connected, everything has an IP address, threat landscape, yes, the world is horrible, but what do we do about it, right? Should we just shut down everything? The answer is, I think, no, we can't just shut down everything. I think today, if we would try to shut down the internet, society as we know today will not function. Right? Just think of all the children with all their social media apps. So what's the path forward, right? So there's a lot of things that we have to do, right? But fundamentally, it goes back to thinking about the cybersecurity strategy that we have today and making sure that we have a clear roadmap that will set up for success, right? So there's a couple of aspects to that, right? Some of these areas, definitely not new, right? I'm not going to bore and talk to you about like how to do vulnerability management. It's important, but some areas are on the other hand more new, right? Like think of like, I don't know, 15 years ago, would we ever talk about cyber insurances? Right? But today, I think it's top of mind for many organizations, right? And it's a very important area. But ultimately, it goes from transitioning our mindset from endpoint activities to continuous activities. And what I mean by that is, let's take the good old vulnerability management as an example. Historically, I remember when I was a consultant, I would go in and do an assessment for like a multinational. Then 6 months down the road, I get the same customer I need to visit, and I do the assessment. And actually, I don't need to do the assessment. I could pull out the old report and present that, right? Because nobody did anything about it, right? And then 6 months later, I go again, It's like a continuous cycle, right? Why is that happening? Because folks are not resourced to handle the load. We don't know what are the prioritization of the activities and so on and so on. So we need to move away from this endpoint, now we have to do it, to how do we enable our teams in order to do it continuously and more effectively, right? So this is true across like risk management, it's true across like, I don't know, employee awareness training. It shouldn't be a checklist, like, oh, I did the once a quarter phishing email and look, 16 people clicked on it, haha, right? It should be something that's actually entertaining, should be fun. People should love to do it or enjoy doing it so that we are having a better culture, better security aware culture. So as part of that, I've seen 2 shifts so far, and I think there's the next one coming, right? We're finally at the point where I think everybody agrees assume breach is a real thing, right? It's not anymore like let's build the walls as high as possible and nothing gonna happen, right? So we understand we'll get compromised, it's just a question of when, not if. The next thing I think we are entering into is an anticipation. And what we mean with anticipation is essentially the concept of putting ourselves into the attacker's mindset, right? So simulating active attacks into our environment, continuously being able to do that, right? Because it's no longer just enough to like, it will not be enough to just think of, okay, we'll get breached and we'll have some detection and response procedures in place, tooling in place and so on. But let's understand how the attackers are going in and prepare for that accordingly, right? So I think that's the next big area that we're gonna see, and there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in this space already, and I think it's gonna be an area that we as a industry need to be aware of and watch out for.
All right, so we have seen the discussion around like what you need to be prepared in terms of regulatory requirements. And in specific to regulatory requirements, let me quote about the SEC proposed rules for cybersecurity. So they have proposed a law basically passing about for all the publicly listed company on cybersecurity. So what some of the requirements include like reporting a material incident within a certain time frame. I think it's around 4 days. And the second requirement is basically mentioning about your incident in your 8K filing report. What does that mean? You're going public with your cyber incident, right? How does that affect your company? There are a lot of things at stake for the company. So that makes a bigger case for you to implement the cybersecurity requirements. So we talked about where do we start, with people, process, technology. What is the practical approach? What should we look at from the regulatory requirements perspective? And if you see the common themes, every region or every specific requirement basically proposes a certain requirements, right? You have to do asset discovery or you have to do vulnerability management. So based on that, we have 5 practical steps to cyber resilience as we have discussed in the anticipation nature. So starting with understanding what are your blind spots? Like, do you have complete visibility in your organization? Do you have complete awareness of what are the assets that you have? Do you have IoT devices? Do you track them? Do you not track them? If you do not track them, what are the mitigating controls that you have in place? Second one, talking about vulnerability and misconfigurations. So this is an interesting one for security practitioners, because when Log4j vulnerability or any kind of bigger vulnerability kind of releases in the environment, it runs, it basically panics the security practitioners, because one, some of the organizations don't know if the vulnerability exists in the organization. Second, if they know the vulnerability exists in the organization, how to fix it? Do we have the people to fix it, or do we need third-party support to fix it? And what happens if we don't fix it, right? So translating that into like business outcomes has become a challenge for so many of them. And you would be surprised. The reason why I'm saying like it is happening in most of the organization, you would be surprised because just because they're not attacked doesn't mean that they're secure. They're just not targeted, that's it. So verifying that only identities have access to the authorized resources. It's important to understand your identity side of things, because you need to understand who are these people or which are these accounts actually having access into the environment, and then understanding your detection and response capabilities, right? So improving upon your detection and response capabilities in terms of different surfaces, like let's say the attack happens through endpoint or cloud, how are we managing that? And next, conversions of security tools. So we have different tools. I think one of the research study basically said that there are more than like 70 plus tools and they have like 25 vendors in the environment on an average for an organization. This kind of throws me off if I was currently a security practitioner. The reason being, I don't have a holistic approach to the security, right? I have always seen the security as in siloed pieces. I'm like, is this secure? Is this secure? But what we need to think is the combine of this, is it secure? If an attacker finds a blind spot, if an attacker finds a vulnerability, is it easy for him to travel through all of these surfaces and attack your environment? And for the next few slides, discussing about all the steps that we have just mentioned about, the approach we're going to talk about is how are the objectives and the outcomes related. So the first one, uncovering all your blind spots. So your assets. What is an asset for you as an organization? Where does your critical asset live? Which are those systems? Are you securing those systems? Do you have like complete understanding from the business? Where does your intellectual property really lies in? The challenge that I've seen in my previous life as well as in other organizations is that I talk to a business leader or a department owner. They kind of say that, oh, this Excel file is from this application, but it's stored in this particular network drive, but it's also stored in a Google Drive. And I'm like, okay, so how are you like securing it from a perspective of a security practitioner, right? So I have a challenge of like implementing controls at all these levels. So I have to start with the data or the asset which it basically lives in. First, I need to understand what are the different types of assets I have in the environment. So organizations have the hardware assets, software assets. Do you have the mechanism to have the inventory up to date? Next is talking about analyzing the criticality, and this requires constant communications with your business leaders because you need to understand from the business leaders what is the asset for them. In your perspective, you might think some of these assets are important. From the business perspective, let's say there is an intellectual property leak or data leak that happens from the business, which you have never considered and you have never understood that from the business, then you're basically creating a gap. And basically, when you recognize the assets and the criticality of the assets, you make sure that you have enough security tools to reduce the risk. And let's know how it's related to business, better outcomes.
Sure. So if you think about it, right, I mean, there have been countless of examples of pretty high profile attacks as well, where the initial entry was an asset that nobody knew about, right? And that asset allowed the attacker to break into the enterprise environment. So it starts with that aspect, right? Being able to actually understand truly your attack surface, right? And as part of that, being able to say, what is my asset inventory look like, right? I've seen a lot of cases like CISOs or security are like, oh yeah, we only have managed assets, so it's fine. I know all my machines because they're an AD. And I'm like, really? Like, no contractors ever come to your office? Your marketing team is not running with the latest and greatest MacBooks? And then it's like, oh yeah, true, I saw once Sarah and then James, and then it comes up and more and more, right? But the key also is, when we talk about asset, it's not just about the endpoint, right? It's also about the identity, and to Manny's point, it's about the data itself, right? A lot of people, when they think about asset discovery or asset management, think about just the endpoint, right? But an enterprise asset goes beyond just the endpoint, right? It can be the data, it can be the identity, and so on. And the reason why this is important, obviously, like the more information like that you have centralized, the faster you'll be able to have the context you need during a breach, and therefore you'll be able to respond more effectively to the incident in your environment.
So the next step is risk-based vulnerability management. I know this is a topic that's always discussed. This is nothing new, and this is nothing like extraordinary that we're trying to like emphasis on. But you would be surprised organizations where they fail to do this. The reason you can actually see in the examples where a new vulnerability releases and organizations are struggling to fix it. So starting with understanding like how your overall IT infrastructure is, how your vulnerabilities in the organizations are basically managed, right? So is there a gap that we need to address in terms of identifying those vulnerabilities? And do we know or have a method as to understand what is the critical vulnerability that we have to fix first, and what is the vulnerability that could wait? And what is the time frame that's been agreed upon? Because when you talk about fixing a vulnerability, you have to have a dependency on IT operations as well. You can't randomly go and fix a vulnerability and let the IT operations team say that, oh, I'm going to tell you soon or later, because you don't want to break the business operations as well, right? So there is an interaction communication piece where you have to constantly discuss with the business and the IT operations as well as security practitioners. And then trying to understand, as we see in the base, right, how these are meeting and ensuring compliance with the SOC 2 or relevant compliance requirements that your organization has. So one of the requirements in SOC 2, right, so as per the AICPA is basically like, is your organization able to identify the vulnerabilities? Is your organization able to mitigate the vulnerabilities? And if you look at CIS top 18 controls also, there is a piece which talks about vulnerability management. So there are requirements which specifically talk about it, but still like organizations have to evaluate which is critical and which is not for them. And coming to, once you fix the vulnerabilities, you basically reduce the risk of compromising, right? And defining those timelines in terms of like, when should you fix it, when and who should be fixing it, and is this even a vulnerability that will create a business breakdown or a business operations breakdown? Those are the factors that you need to consider when you're talking about vulnerabilities as such.
And what's fascinating, and let's do an exercise here. Everyone, who agrees that WannaCry was a really big thing for our world? Show of hand. Not everyone. Okay, I'm surprised about that one. Okay. What was fascinating for me is a recent study I saw on WannaCry. Now, like, until now, 3 out of 10 enterprises are not patched for WannaCry. Right? If you think about the impact WannaCry had to 200,000 endpoints, to critical infrastructure, to hospitals, it's mind-blowing that we still have organizations out there that didn't apply the patches required to protect themselves against WannaCry. And this is the reason why we need a new approach on how we handle vulnerability management. It's simply, from my perspective, not acceptable. Like, if I'm the CEO, right, and I'm like, I hear that there's this massive thing that happened, how many years ago, and my organization may still not know how to handle it, it's just not acceptable, right? And this is the key thing that we need to understand. How do we move from these static things where you just give them a list, oh, we should have patch, we should do that patch, right? I mean, everybody agrees, it's Patch Tuesday, we should do that, but we never get to that, right? I don't know, Adobe has a new patch, we should do that, right? But we never get to that.
Right, so going into the identity threat protection, right? So identity access management, identity as such is an interesting topic because in my previous life as well, I have seen where, when the organization is moving into cloud, just understanding how it affects the end user from a perspective of like, are they getting the access that they need to know only, or are they getting the excessive access they're not supposed to know about? And defining that as a security practitioner is very important to you. The reason being, most of the times what happens is that you just move into a disruptive technology or move into the cloud or cloud transformation, and you fail to ignore what has been defined as a benchmark for a user, right? And now the trend is that every organization is going into multi-cloud. Organizations are struggling to understand what is fine for a user to access in this particular cloud environment and which is not fine for the user to access it. And that's when there are a lot of threats that happen in terms of like data leakage, in terms of insider threats actually exploiting this. So coming to that understanding of like how you're protecting data and resources by actually giving access to the users as they need it to, and principle of least privilege. And we're also moving into an area of zero trust where the user is continuously authenticated as they access the resources, right? And definitely identity is a core part of every regulation and the requirement that's coming up. So ensuring that you're compliant with this particular requirement. Basically, like if you look back, you'd see like, isn't it like the cyber hygiene 101? Yes, but not every organization is meeting it. And that's why we're discussing it today. And the most important factor as security practitioners we tend to miss is we should not be the person saying no to the users, right? We should always enable the business and enable the business operations. But we have to find a balance between achieving security and as well as enabling business. And that's done in various ways. How are we enabling business? Like through a tool, through a process, through training. What are the options that we are giving to business? I think that's also important.
Yeah, I mean, as part of that, if you think about, in the identity world, we've been preaching for a long time, hey, everybody should have MFA. till today, not many organizations have MFA implemented successfully or across the enterprise. Right? I've seen situations where the head of security architecture is like, yeah, we did MFA. I'm like, cool. Well, show me your exception catalog. Right? And it's like, oh, but these are my execs. I cannot have them have MFA. I'm like, you definitely need MFA for all of them. Like, or like, as our CFO, I'm like, you definitely need for your CFO MFA. MFA might not be even enough in these situations, right? And what's interesting in the identity space, and I was talking to an industry analyst about it, it's like history is repeating itself right now, what happened in the endpoint world. And what I mean by that is, in the endpoint side, there was everything prevention, there was like attack surface rules, there was AV, and then at one point people are like, oh, we need something else to detect and respond, so EDR stuff came up. Similar things is happening now on the identity side. It used to be, if I have an IAM that is good, it's sufficient, right? But then people are like, well, what about if we get breached? It's like, oh, it's true. We need something to detect and respond to it, right? And this is, again, goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like we need a convergence to happening because we can't keep adding more and more complexity into our environments, right? Because what we want to do is that our reference Manny was saying with the 73 applications, security tools, we want to reduce that, right? Just imagine the time you're spending on security training for your security team. 73 tools, like that's too expensive.
Next, understanding the different surfaces that you have in your environment, right? So you have your endpoints, basically, or your laptops, whatever the endpoints that you have in your organization. We also have a cloud, which is, I think, has become integral part in your organization now. And I think the only path forward that I'm seeing for some of the organizations is going into this multi-cloud journey. And understanding like how are you detecting incidents in all of these surfaces together? Like, do you have like a context as to how the attack happened, or how many threats are you trying to mitigate on a daily basis, or how is the SOC team performing in terms of like mitigating and detecting these incidents across these surfaces? And also understanding that detection and response is something that the area that I really like, because this area, like if you're not doing it right, you can actually get attacked by a cyber adversary, right? So understanding and how, if there are like threat actors trying to like do an understanding of your environment, they're also already like in your environment, so your detection process and capabilities basically failed. So understanding those, and if you see the regulatory requirements also in every of these, like PCI DSS, SOC 2, HIPAA, anyone, you specifically talk about detection and response as well. So I think as going forward from the SEC proposed cybersecurity rules, or for any kind of regulations that are going to come in the future, they're going to be a specific category where we talk about detection and response and how much time you're trying to detect and respond, and what are the tools, processes, and the people that are involved in this detection and response category. And you basically, by all of this, you're trying to reduce the potential for a threat actor exploiting any kind of vulnerability and trying to launch an attack, right?
Ultimately, I think it's today well understood, right? We need the ability for us to detect and respond to malicious as well as suspicious activities. The challenge that we're facing right now in many SecOps teams is just the sheer volume of different tools that are typically disconnected, or they are retrospectively glued together by our security engineering teams with some API work, right? But the problem with that is, like, as we have so many disconnected tools and we're trying to put more and more glue on, unless you're a good artist, like, that statue will look really ugly, right? Like, if I try to glue stuff together, it won't look good. So we need to understand, essentially, go back on Lego, right? What are the right blocks we need to put together in order for us to be more effective in our ability to detect and respond, right? Some of these abilities you want to partner with others, some of the stuff you want to have in-house, but we need to have that conversation within our teams to really understand first what is the threat landscape for our organization, and then you can move into understanding what are the things that we need across, like training, the right procedures, the right playbooks, and the right technology.
So the last step in the 5 practical approach to cyber resilience is basically the convergence of security tools or unified security platform. So the challenges, as mostly we have quoted in the session already, the challenges is the disparate sources of data that exist within different tools. And when a SOC analyst or a SOC operations team basically looks at the data, they're trying to like understand, okay, what does this data make sense of? Like, and you have like different retention requirements also. So I was part of an incident investigation where I had to get data like 1 year back. Then I suddenly realized from one of my colleagues that the SIEM basically retains the data only for 6 months. So now I was called to the CFO and I was like, asked like, okay, so why aren't you giving me any data retention or the data related to the incident? I was like, well, our SIEM platform has only like 6 months of data retention policy. And he basically asked like, why was I not informed about this, right? So there are some gaps that we have to identify, and this happened like within 10 days of me joining that company. And I was like, okay, so we don't have an understanding of the data retention requirements even for incident investigation across disparate sources, whether it is my EDR, whether it is my SIEM, whether it is my any kind of like storage mechanism that I have in the organization, right? So have that understanding. How does that fit in with your records retention policy? How does that fit in your investigation and response? Because you have to have all these pieces put together to understand the puzzle of like detecting an incident and participating in that investigation of the incident. And understanding like how your tools data have to be integrated or ingested and making sense of that data. So you don't want to have again a disparate source, and I have to ask one of my team members to basically go into each of these tools, pick up the data, make sense of the data so that I can relate the data from this tool to another tool. So we have to have that ingestion mechanism and trying to put analytics on it so that we have a holistic picture to the security of your organization. And most of the times what happens is that as security practitioners, we are so involved in our day-to-day life, we tend to miss the bigger picture. Like how does it affect the business? So what are the legal repercussions in the previous incident that I mentioned about? If I don't have the data to prove about the incident investigation, what am I supposed to do? Like I should give some options to my business leaders, right? So what do I have in place? And understanding that having these disparate or like multiple solutions in place is not going to be effective. And this might actually contribute for you to not have a business case with the business leaders, right? So you have to think holistically. And the best tool out there might not be the best tool for your organization. So you have to understand how these pieces fit together for your organization. First, understanding how this involves your organization.
There's an interesting study around unified security data lakes I saw the other day. It said 42% of all organizations are looking into security data lakes. Awesome. They did another survey with the same study group. 60% of these organizations failed their data lake projects. And the reason was because they didn't have a plan or an understanding of what type of data they wanted to bring in. They tried to do it on the fly, realized that data normalization did not really work for the data they wanted to bring in, and then gave up essentially their projects. Right? So as we were looking into unifying our security platforms, data lakes, and so on, the first thing is actually understanding what is the data governance model, what is the data we need to bring into the data lake, right? And we should be telling that, whoever is the consultant, the vendor, and so on, and say, these are the things that we need to bring in. Like, don't give me the list of integrations. This is the list I need to make work, right? Can you do it, yes or no? And if they say they can do it, show me, right? When you say you can handle structured data, that's great, show me. You can handle semi-structured data, great, show me. Unstructured data, a lot of people claim that. Please show me how you handle unstructured data in your data lake.
All right.
Yeah, so look, we talked a lot about the different components, right? But just to essentially bring it back together, right? The first step is we need to understand our attack surface, right? As simple as that. We need to understand the endpoints that are out there, the identity, the data, and so on. We need to, once we know what assets that we have in our environment, we can then actually help understand what are the vulnerabilities that might get exploited within there. From there, we need to move into a stage of making sure that only trusted identities with healthy endpoints get access when they need it to the corporate resources and services. We need to simplify our security stack as much as possible, right? It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be beneficial in the long run. And then at one point, we'll move into a state where we can consolidate it in a central security platform.
Yeah, moving forward, so as we understood like how these regulatory requirements exist and how you start with a white paper or do you utilize the existing process to make your process better, we live in a hyper-connected world. And just to summarize, saying that we want organizations to move from a reactive approach to being a proactive approach. And that's how the path to cyber resilience also moves, right? So from assume breach to the anticipation stage. And this is the last slide for the session. So basically applying what you learned today. So the next week, you should be able to understand the different tools that you have for your asset inventory. What are the tools with regards to your hardware, software, applications, whatever the assets that you have in your organization. In the first 3 months, focusing on the vulnerabilities. How do you identify your vulnerabilities? What is the vulnerability management program in place? And what are the changes that you can bring in the vulnerability management program so that you are able to make changes that are really effective for the business as well as the IT operations team as well as the security team. And in 6 months, you can relook at your people, process, technology. Are all of these processes and areas are coming together, fitting in your bigger environment? Are the tools really making sense, giving the output that you need to? And what are the challenges that you're facing in terms of these areas? And all of this requires not just talking, but an implementation project, having that plan, strategy planned out across all these areas and understanding how you secure critical assets. That's the key of the whole conversation. I think that should be the end. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you.
I mean, we're open for Q&A if you have any questions. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for a very good presentation. My question is related to the first month action that you have listed here. One of the challenges we all know is related to the movement of the data, and now the challenge is how we avoid the noise in the vulnerability management system. Yes, it's great to have risk-based and very good information about our risks and vulnerabilities, but after deploying solution, we get noise and the story of we have a wolf, and then there is false positive everywhere. Then when the real case comes, no one pays attention because it was a noise for similar 10 other cases before. So would you please list down your experience and recommendation for avoiding noise and how we have more prioritized and eliminated unnecessary vulnerability stuff that we should focus on only what matters the most?
You want to take that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I think, look, it boils down to the signal to noise ratio, right? So how much volume do we have? How much value will we get out of it, right? The fundamental problem is FPs will always exist, so as true positives, which is good, right? The question is how can we reduce the FP rate over time? And as part of that, I think you are looking into having the right procedures and the right tooling in place that learns from your environment as much as possible, right? Because by default, you're looking into essentially something that doesn't know your environment, has no idea about the context of the organization, and then you will see FPs where it's like, well, this clearly is bad, right? But what's important is that as you're labeling, right, that this solution, this platform should help you learn from that, right? It's like if you continuously have an FP for the same topic and after like 5, 6, 10 times, you're labeling it as true positives, it still does the same thing. It's a time where you want to ask like why this is happening, right? Ultimately, you will always have FPs, right? The key is to reduce the FP volume over time. And that's when you provide the context of your organization to the playbooks or to the technology that you're using. You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I'm curious about your thoughts on whether APIs should be part of your asset inventory. What do you do there?
Thank you. Yes, it should be, right? There's a few aspects to it. I think we don't do enough when we think about APIs, securing APIs. I actually was talking about like a few months ago with a few colleagues in this space. I'm like everybody talks about the endpoint and all that stuff, but if you think about like API development, it's like the Wild West. Like everybody's like, oh, we need an API, no problem, let me write one, right? But nobody thinks about like how do we make sure that this API can't be abused and so on. So yes, we need to understand what APIs are we exposing as well as are we consuming inside the organization.
Yeah, it should be part of the asset inventory.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, we'll go down here. If you have more questions, happy
Yeah.
to respond.